Hi, this is David Gornoski, host of A Neighbor's Choice and Things Hidden podcast, as well as some of our other programs like Science and You with our chief science advisor, Dr. Yu, and our seed oil survival series that we continue to have great fun unpacking the truth of nutrition. I wanted to give you a quick little message saying we appreciate all the support that we get from our uh, monthly contributors and our one-time donation supporters. And we'd encourage all of you to go to our website, a neighborschoice.com, click on contribute, and make a monthly pledge today, whether it's $1, $5, 15, 20, 50, whatever you want to do. Doesn't matter. Just be a part of building this new media project that we've developed to empower and inform, to inspire, to kickstart a scientific renaissance, an anthropological breakthrough and reformation in the church. All these things are possible with your support right now. So make that commitment today and help us keep doing the productions that we have. Thank you. We're back for another Things Hidden discussion. I'm David Gornoski, your host here with Surit Dasgupta. Again, I'm not in the studio at this time, so Surit is holding down the fort on a video-wise standpoint as we continue doing our analysis about current events through an anthropological framework guided by the personhood revolution of Jesus. How you doing, Surit?
Hey, I'm doing fine, David. Glad to be with you again.
So let's go to this first story. It's just a framing for what we're going to look at today, which is in the current events all the time. So, but it was somebody had tweeted out a link to a magazine glossing over the effects of the French Revolution. Can you share or read the tweet for us?
Yeah, sure. The Jacobin Max shared a tweet that says what we owe to the French Revolution, a debt of gratitude. And I'm just reading the tweet here, not going to go into the article. But the tweet says on July 14, 1789, the people of Paris rose up to take history into their own hands. Because of the power of the Jacobin idea, and because enough of them lived on to fight another day, the revolution changed the world. We are all its beneficiaries. So, a person who has retweeted this article has mentioned some of the things that they have pointed out as the like the good things, quote unquote, good things that came out of the revolution. It says collective action, women's liberation, reproductive rights, and the things that they haven't mentioned, uh, surprisingly, I guess, is that 40,000 people were brutally murdered in a perpetual witch hunt of a crazed society, vast swaths executed without a trial. So I guess they wanted to gloss over that. They didn't want to mention the people at Jacobin Mag. They didn't want to mention that the French Revolution was a very bloody affair. It wasn't a kind of, a peaceful revolution that a more civilized society might expect nowadays. And yeah, I guess like that's one of the things that they want to hide. And a lot of people, they fail to mention like this is, and I spoke with this and I spoke about this with Shane Kennedy on a 4th of July episode, is that this one of the differences between the American Revolution and the French Revolution is that the French Revolution was very anti-Christian, right? It's very it wanted to overhaul culture as a whole, and the American Revolution was just concerned with the overthrow of the tyrants from Britain. So that's what I think of it. What do you make of this?
Yeah, so we have to look back at mythology prior to the arrival of Jesus in history. Mythology was a way in which a society would describe the psychological benefits and effects that had been passed down for them generation to generation of sacrificial murders. And that is the lynching of a common victim to create propitiation for the bad blood that can brew in a society triggered by issues like scarcity, paranoia, economic collapse, famine, plague, and so forth. So uh, of course, the French Revolution is taking place uh, many centuries after Jesus arrives in history, and so it's not a full mythological event. There's countervailing narratives that you're allowed to pierce the veil of would-be myth makers. Let's make sure we understand that you cannot have full myth in the after effect of Christianity in cultures that have been infected by Christianity. You can have attempts at myth making. You can have, what we would call tattered myths, and that is a mythic veil with lots of holes in it and veil openings so you can pierce through the lies and the projection of what people want the story to be, and you can more clearly see the gritty realities when you see different vantage points allowed to have a voice. And that's what's important with myth, is that there is no allowance of the perspective of the victim of sacrifice. It's only the winner's crowd that gets to write the story. With the Gospels, his followers are able to account the honest depiction of his perspective of his sacrificial murder, and therefore it opens up a whole new creative dynamic by which people can see that the winner's crowd is not necessarily telling the truth. If they had successfully murdered Jesus like any other mere mortal, what would have happened was they would have projected him into the sky as a prophet or a kind of god or some sort, and you wouldn't have ever even noticed the gritty violence. You wouldn't have noticed the whippings, the brutality, the nails, the mockery. All of that would have been obfuscated by the veil of the myth. But because the Gospels are telling the story of God coming into humanity and going through the role of the sacrificial victim, all of societies had been offering in their own image tokens of their affections to the gods in the form of sacrificial tokens. And in the gospel stories, God comes into humanity and says, "This is how you make sacred. Well, I'm going to offer you a sacrificial offering of my own self to you to show you how ridiculous what it is that you're doing to each other is, and how ridiculous you've made my character and my image appear for only really your needs to have bloodletting, your needs to have status, right? And that's what the Gospels is all about. So when you look at that tweet, it just shows you that even though, these events have happened now, we're 2,000 years past Christ, there's still an attempt to try to be super Christian, as Rene Girard pointed out, to be above and beyond what Christianity does to defend the vulnerable, and to say, no, we have to defend the vulnerable so hard and so demagogue like, so aggressively that we will justify sacrificing other people and otherizing and trying to vanquish their voice from the historical record so that we can elevate the perceived victims that were elevated in that sacrificial murder. And so when you look at the French Revolution, that's what that magazine is going to do. It's going to talk about so-called benefits, which are not benefits. But you would talk about reproductive rights. Reproductive rights means might makes right. They're saying might makes right. Might makes rights, right? Might makes rights. They're not talking about reproductive rights. They're talking about the I have the sovereign ability to murder a little human in a fictitious rite, which is really a rite of passage for your signaling that you are subservient to the reigning gods of materialism, right? I am such a good, faithful handmaiden to the big bosses, which are all men at the top of banks and the military industrial complex and pharmaceuticals and all these trust fund babies. And largely it's still men running the show who create these narratives and fund these narratives. And so when you sacrifice your child because you want to get back to scrubbing toilets or working at Apple or whatever it is, that your high status little job trying to want to be a man ideology makes you want to do, you're saying I'm so committed to the cause of eternal revolution, of the worship of the human desire and human triumph over limitations and boundaries, that I'm willing to murder my own child as a token of my loyalty to the revolutionary cause of selfishness, of self-determination, which is all an illusion. You don't have determination of yourself. You're desiring what your neighbor has. And so any ideology, including these French Revolution derived ideologies like liberalism that still want to make it look like you are a self-created actor, they're all primitive lies, because that's not how anthropology actually reveals humans to be. We are interdivisible. We desire not what our heart truly desires. We desire to be like those around us who we feel are of high status to emulate. And that's exactly what people are doing when they do the rite of murder passage, the rite of passage ritual murder that is reproductive rights and that word. So yeah, they cover up the fact that there's people butchered. They're covering up the fact there's no voice for the girl who was murdered in the French Revolution. There's no voice for the little boy who watches his pious parents assaulted and raped by these marauders. There's no voice for him. He doesn't get to have his quote in Jacobin magazine, right? Because his life doesn't matter. Because what matters is the cause, and the cause is might makes right, revenge of the nerds, revivification of sacrificial violence and hierarchy. That's what's going on. And so I say that just to set up kind of this theme that myth is always going to try to obfuscate the reality of the violence on hand. And that's what we are fighting against. That's what we are contending when we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities. What it means to wrestle against principalities is to wrestle against this myth-making delusion that we all operate under in different ways, right? That my team is allowed to smash somebody's head in or steal their stuff or lie and destroy them and ostracize them because our cause justifies that a few men should die to make the whole nation not perish. That is the logic of Caiaphas. That's the logic of politics and religion. And that's what Christianity is moving us away from. And the more we become cognizant of that and start being intentional in our awareness of this and living this out, the better things can be, because Christians will actually be properly armed with the ability to contend for the faith as we're called to do. So with that, let's go to that story that we saw with this Tucker Carlson forum here in Iowa, where he had all of the non-Trump contenders for the Republican Party nomination come out. And I when I saw it, let me just set the table here. I didn't watch the whole thing. I just saw a few clips that were the most widely
me too.
mentioned clips. But here's the takeaway I got from this. Tucker Carlson and Glenn Beck have decided, they're going to work together to some degree. Tucker announced he's going to do some network. I think my guess, and I don't know if maybe it's already been said, but my guess is going to be some kind of alliance between Blaze and Tucker's new outfit, or maybe not. Maybe they'll just be friends, but it seems like there could be some kind of crossover alliance there. And then I think also what you're going to see is that Tucker and Glenn are kind of repositioning with their power a kind of alliance to push out some of the neocon aligned power structures in conservative media, like the Ben Shapiro, the Hannity wings of Fox News. Both of them have a desire to see Fox News diminished. I think a lot of folks do, who are sick and tired of their perpetual support for wars and lies and carnage and deceit that so many of their hosts have been so good at pushing for decades. So I think you're going to see that. And I think what was going on there with Trump not being there, I think that was basically a tag team where Tucker goes in and tries to winnow the field. He tries to thin the field a little bit of some of these little neocon hacks that are trying to come in and disrupt Trump's run here, which is interesting. It's kind of like, it's like a, hey, you sit this one out. I'll take these little, D-listers and thin the field out of this little group a little bit. He seemed to be, from what I saw, he wasn't very contentious with Ron DeSantis. So maybe that would go against the general feeling I got, which was Tucker was tagging in for Trump to take out some of his opponents. If that was truly the case, and maybe it wasn't, but if that was the case, you would think you'd be a little bit tougher on Ron DeSantis. But he was pretty tough with, Tim Scott, who is a standard, neocon Republican. He kind of walked him through the absurdities of the war lies by asking, okay, what's the end result? What are we getting? And he didn't have an answer. He didn't have any answer because he's just there as another bought and paid for asset of the war merchants and banks that just lie us with their stupid rhetoric. And we're all sick and tired of it. And I thank God, first of all, I thank God about how far, it's not as fast as I'd like, but how far we've come from 2012 and 2008 when Ron Paul was running in the Republican nomination, and the party would hiss and boo at anybody saying, blessed are the peacemakers and stuff like that. Ron Paul was very much treated like a pariah by virtually all of the media in Republican media circles, and all of the questions and everything was all stacked. The crowds were stacked. But that's no longer the case now that, the post-Trump presidency. Trump has really helped normalize deep suspicion with war. And there is a large faction in the Republican base which still is very stupidly pro-war. But that party you heard their crowd reactions when Tucker was making some zingers about staying out of Ukraine. They were pretty largely in favor of the non-interventionist perspective. And that used to be when Ron Paul would do those zingers, it was always like maybe 1/4 of the crowd would be cheering very loudly for his non-interventionist rhetoric. And now it looks more like, I'd say 50 to 60% of the crowd approval, at least, is in the non-interventionist perspective. So that's a good sign, although, again, not as fast as we need for the sake of the elect, for the sake of those who God would want us to spare from these wicked, murderous wars and the sanctions that go with it. But having said that, Tim Scott was pretty much eviscerated. Asa Hutchins had a moment where Tucker said, well, how many shots did you take? And he said, well, how many did you take? And he said, none, 0. And the crowd was very raucously in support of that. And Asa Hutchins, again, another, I don't know much about him, but just from whatever I've seen, another corporate neocon asset, very cheaply owned. And then you get to what I thought, he had Mike Pence on, and Mike Pence really showed his colors. Mike Pence has always been used to, a very supportive media in the sense of he would get heat as long as he was associated with Trump. But, anything that he was doing in disassociating himself with Trump was highly glossed over and supported by our corporate media class. And so Mike Pence really showed how ugly and sinister the neocon, fake evangelical nonsense really looks in light of someone with sincere questioning on stage. And I think that's important, is that Tucker Carlson was the first time we've ever had, because of his clout, and I'm glad he's cashing it in as fast as he can to, leverage it with, interacting with these candidates. He's such a man of the moment right now in the media that they have to pass through his non-interventionist, filter. And that's awesome. Like, that's a great win. the hottest thing in media right now for traditional conservative media is a guy who's pretty vehemently non-interventionist. And so having that be a gatekeeper is a great thing, right? Having that voice be the kingmaker. I mean, Rush Limbaugh was great, but he wasn't an adamant non-interventionist, and he was great in terms of his, rhetorical defense of, free markets and, a positive view of yourself, that kind of thing, but not when it came to the life and death matters of war and so forth. So to have that change of guard is a breath of fresh air, and it has life-saving potential if it can actually result in some real world changes to things like ending this disastrous policy in Ukraine. So that was good to see his impact, but having Mike Pence there was really a great telling moment, because he likes to talk with that little, I'm a pastor's voice, and I've been over there, and I can tell you, America stands with our allies like you've never seen before. He likes that little, what was that guy's name that used to do, Are you ready to rumble?
Yeah, that announcer
Yeah,
from
yeah.
WCW,
Boxing,
Michael
in boxing.
Buffer,
Yeah, is that it?
Buffer.
Mike Buffer?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah,
He said, and he said, he did a little bit of a evangelical voice with a little bit of that Mike Buffer voice.
yeah, like a
Ladies,
white Martin Luther, like a white
yeah,
Martin Luther King. Huh?
ladies and gentlemen, it is my privilege to announce that I, too, am owned by the neoconservative foreign policy establishment. And so, this is a clown that, I have a particular dislike for folks like Mike Pence, because they wrap their pathetic, lying, corrupt, and disastrous selling out of innocent lives and American people. They wrap that up with this veneer of sanctity and Christian piety, which is such a disgrace. If there's ever been an example of taking the Lord's name in vain, it's folks like Mike Pence. And again, he's just representative of George W. Bush and the whole package. But Pence was able to do something that Bush wasn't, in the sense that Pence really doubled down on, I'm really evangelical. Whereas George W. Bush was like establishment, but friendly to evangelicals. And everybody kind of knew that, but Pence, like, I'm one of you. I'm a hardcore conservative. No, you're not. You don't do anything about the WTO. You will never do anything about the IMF. You'll never do anything about NATO. You'll never do anything about NAFTA or any of these types of rigged trade deals. You'll never do anything about the $1 trillion foreign policy bankruptcy of the American people. You'll never do anything about serious protection of America's interests in terms of, a border or anything like that has any respect for a nation. He's not going to do anything of serious. He's just another, multinational corporate owned, vanilla cookie cutter empty suit. But he happens to really double down on using Jesus as his brand, which is despicable when you're just selling the same crass garbage that's not even intelligent or sophisticated or thoughtful or dynamic. And so he goes on there and says, well, Mike, I think Tucker said, he was asking him, well, what did you ask the folks in Ukraine that you visited now twice? Did you ask them about the crackdown and persecution of the Russian Orthodox Church, right? And Mike Pence says, well, I can tell you this. I met with the patriarch of the Orthodox Church, of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, and he told me they're not doing any funny business over there. And so I take that to believe. And I'm like, dude, stop, man. This gimmick would work if this was 1983. This gimmick would work if this was 1982. This whole, I've been to Ukraine and I talked to the Orthodox patriarch, and he assured me we are not doing anything funky over there. And you look at that and you say, that doesn't work anymore. Okay. Your little clown gimmick doesn't work. People are not falling for your little, sanctimonious rhetorical tones and timbre and all that.
to sell us stupidity. And as Tucker pointed out, okay, well, that doesn't answer the question. You met with a guy who has every reason to tell you that they haven't persecuted or censored religious, minorities. So that's the great thing about having Tucker. He actually has a heart, he actually has a conscience, and he actually has a brain. And putting someone with a basic conscience, with a basic brain, and a basic heart, and putting them in the stage with these fake little slithering neocons is like pouring water on the Wicked Witch from Wizard of Oz. They can't handle someone with a brain, with a heart, and with a conscience being able to sit and ask them basic questions. Like, they melt. And he got mad. You can see Mike Pence's little gimmick was finally falling apart. His little pro wrestling gimmick, he finally broke character because he started getting really insecure.
Oh yeah, he started to go after Tucker, like saying, "Oh, I've seen you do this thing before, like it's routine." Yeah.
I've seen this routine from you before. Yeah, well, so but Mike, you got a routine. That's what I would have said. I'd say, bro, you got a routine. You got a routine. You're doing your little voice like this. Just, you're trying to talk with that whole Billy Goat thing. You got a routine, brother. Your routine is using the Prince of Peace to sell merchants of war interests. That's your routine. Okay. And that's what you do, is you obfuscate the truth. You want to talk to the American people like they're a bunch of, mentally challenged 3-year-olds or something. Like, they can't process, oh, he talked to the guy that has every interest to tell his side of the story, and he assured me there's no other side to the story. This is that stupid myth-making attempt that the Jacobin magazine, which Mike Pence and Neocons are Jacobins. They come from the same stuff.
Oh yeah.
Revolution. Mm-hmm. Garbage. So they come from that same framework where it's like, but the pathetic thing is that Mike Pence's little gimmick, his little routine, is trying to gussy up his revolutionary politics, which has no concern for human dignity in its true sense. He tries to, put a conservative traditionalist veneer on it. And then, people wonder why people don't want to hear about evangelicals and their political impact, because this is the kind of evangelical gimmicks that they get presented to them. So, and then he made a comment or something like, Tucker said something like, I want to acknowledge that you are running for president or something like that. And Mike Pence made a little insecure comment like, thank you, or something, like, thank you for acknowledging that, or something like that.
Yeah.
He was really insecure. He was insecure and angry that for the first time in his life, he was in a bottleneck situation where he had to answer to a person who is not a whore for war. Because this is a punk who is used to, whether it's Democrat media or conservative media, they all agree that we should have a Federal Reserve, that we should have, election machines. That was another thing that, Mike Pence was insecure about. Why can't we have paper ballots?
Yeah, he probably should have let his wife sit in the interview. Like,
yeah.
Yeah, remember that time that they were making a big deal about, oh no, why doesn't Mike Pence have so many allegations on him? Just because he never sits in an interview without his wife, especially when talking to a lady. It looks like he should have had his wife sit on it right now. But one of the things that really struck me in this clip is Tucker was he was presenting this scenario, and it's real scenario. Is that okay? Like, imagine the American cities are totally getting devastated, poverty is on the rise, suicide is jumping up, and this homelessness is growing, and so on and so on. But here you are concerned about which tank you're going to send. You're concerned about that the Ukraine gets the latest updated American tank. Do you have no concern whatsoever for the American public? And I don't know if it was a Freudian slip or what, but it's very shocking. Like, this is a guy who is about to run for president, and he says that I have no concern whatsoever. And I'm like, this person would never have been sitting there on a platform if it hadn't been for Donald Trump. Basically, he rode on Donald Trump's coattails, I guess,
Yeah.
during the entire Trump
Yeah.
administration, and he got the popularity he got because of Trump's voter base. And right now, I don't think anybody is going to fall for his rhetoric anymore, because they outright, when he said that he has no concern whatsoever, they outright booed him. And it was a very it reminded me, like you said, about when Ron Paul used to take on the stage in 2008, I guess 2012. But instead of getting booed, here is a non-interventionist getting cheered, and the interventionist getting booed. And yeah, this is the improvement that you mentioned. So I'm just wondering, like, how does this person even stand a chance in the presidency when the
But
majority?
he doesn't. He doesn't. He's just doing book deals. He's doing TV deals. He's trying to keep his brand going, and he's in a situation where it's like most of those people are running for president, to maybe be a VP pick for Trump or whoever, Ron, or, they might be thinking in their mind, Ron can win. I don't think so. They can do whatever they can to try to get. They might arrest Trump, put him in a dungeon. Who knows? To make sure he's not in there. But I don't know what. I think most of them are just looking to be a VP pick, or they're also trying to work on their Fox News or other media gig opportunities. Their speaking fees. When you run for office in the media, you can get higher speaking fees. If you can get book deals that are better. You can get positions with law firms that are going to be high powered, high status. So they're all doing it for status. They're all of them are doing
It's a
it for
career
status.
move, isn't it? Like this
It's so funny.
presidential.
Donald Trump is the most brazenly status obsessed political figure we've ever had, but in some sense, he's the one doing it with the least amount of status in mind, right? Because they keep indicting him for like everything they can come up with the more he stays as a political figure. And he makes a point that, if I stopped running, they would all go away. I don't think so. I think there's people in the establishment hate him so much. Some of them are so insane. And it's, Trump's ego reminds me of like David Bentley Hart. He would come on there and other folks like him that would, they would get really sensitive about his ego. Right. And I think that, I don't know what the term is. I'm sure psychology fans who are more into that field would have a term for it. But Trump's egoism, I always found it to be endearing in a kind of tongue-in-cheek way, obviously. But I've noticed that there's a certain kind of person. I don't know if it's ego sickness, like they have an ego sickness, where it's like
They don't want to admit
when
failure.
someone like David Bentley Hart, very smart person, and he has got some good ideas to think about on some issues with regards to Christianity. But someone as smart as him, when he hears that Trump gimmick of I'm the one that can save you, it's like they have something switch off where they can't. It's like pro wrestling fans that they really don't know how to suspend the disbelief, right? They really believe it.
The pro
it's
wrestling
like
marks. Yeah.
no, but that's what I'm saying. There's a certain level of ego sickness that some folks have. They can be sharp as can be, but when they get around someone who plays that little bravado character, their brain or whatever has no ability to like put it in context. Like, oh, he's being kind of tongue in cheek. They can't. They're just like, oh, ego. My ego's diminished by his ego. How dare he say he's great? It's like they can't even for one moment have any kind of like ironic detachment, right? And I think that a lot of these folks that are like triggered by Trump's bravado, oh, he's all in it for himself. Like in some sense, I agree with his statement that he has had more to lose by being involved politically than anybody in any political party in terms of the major nominees in decades, because his net worth went down during his time in office. He's got criminal and we all know for a fact that if he had stayed as a Democrat donor or Republican establishment donor, he wouldn't have any of these criminal investigations right now. He'd have some TV deal or some endorsement deals or something going on. He might have he wouldn't have any of these criminal investigations going on, and he wouldn't be dealing with all of the disruptions to his standard. But that's the kind of thrill that he enjoys, and he does do it for his ego. But these other folks, they're just not that talented. They're just standard garden variety, cheap sellouts, cheap prostitutes for the most disgusting pillaging of the American people and the world's population we could ever imagine. And that's why they're so contemptuous. And Trump is not a deep change maker. He didn't get rid of NATO. He didn't get us out of NATO is what I'm saying. He didn't come through on the things that he really, some of the highest. He didn't audit the Federal Reserve as he promised to do. He didn't drain the swamp. He picked all the dumb Republican establishment psychopaths. I don't know if he's, and then you got his fan base that says Trump's a secret, Bruce Wayne-like figure that when he flubs his words, like if he, sometimes he'll slur a word, they'll say that's a secret code for, if he's, what I mean? If he flubs a word, they'll say that's secret code for he's going to come and bring back JFK Jr. One time he recently called RFK Jr. JFK Jr. and some of his fans that are a little bit too online were saying that's secret code for, JFK Jr. is going to come back from some hiding spot he's been in Antarctica. I mean, I don't know what these people come up with, but the point is that Trump is obviously self-interested, but he's interested in himself in a way that's completely more fresh and tolerable for, I think, a lot of normal-minded people who are not ego sick. If you're ego sick, right? If you've got some problem with your ego, where you've got this pomposity that you don't want to confront in your mirror, when Trump comes and he reveals his pomposity, you have to smash the mirror. If you're kind of healthy with yourself, if you don't take yourself, that's what it is. If you don't take yourself so seriously, you're on your own self. Like if you're at a point where you're like, I can laugh at myself, I can, not take myself super seriously. Then when you see a Trump play with his little cockiness, you're like, okay, that's just, that doesn't threaten me. But when you get folks like David Bentley Hartley and stuff that are just, and he represents millions of Americans who don't know how to take themselves in a playful way. Like they don't want to accept that egoism is deeply motivating their desires. They're not, they haven't reconciled with their shadow, in other words, right? They haven't looked. I mean, you saw that recently. There was a meme going around showing what conservatives view themselves as picture wise, what they view liberals as, and then they made liberals what they themselves as and what they view the conservatives. And they're all generally normal faces, except for what liberals viewed a conservative face to look like. And it was this terrifying, like demonic face. And you're like, that's a person, that's an ideological encampment of minds that is not okay with their shadow. They haven't integrated it. They haven't been able to process their own darkness and what they're capable of, right? And so because they haven't been able to do that, because they're lost in the self-delusion of romantic individualism, right? That they believe I am truly a hero and I am truly purely good and hate has no home in my house. That stupidity. That's so dumb. Like how it's the kind of stupidity. It's a moral stupidity. It's a foolishness because like anybody who would actually believe Mike Pence rhetoric, I talked to the leader of the Orthodox Church in Ukraine, and he assured me they haven't been doing nothing. Like, what idiot, Like,
Well,
what idiot?
what
In the
leader of
21st
the
century, after anybody has ever read any book of literature, any murderous book of literature, any war analysis, anybody could possibly say, well, he asked one side of that war and they said they did nothing of censorship, so that's it. That's really analysis. Like that's the stupidest stuff you could ever have if you have like a normal sense of yourself. You know what I mean? At least a humbled, healthy view of yourself.
well, I mean, like what leader of the Orthodox Church did he talk to? Like, did he talk to the schismatic church
Yeah,
leader?
that's
I mean,
all
like that leadership was propped up basically by John McCain and his fellow people. Like they wanted to.
that's saying Mike Pence. He's either dumb. I don't think he's dumb. I think he's playing a character. He may be that breathtakingly dumb, but that's incredible. I mean, he may be. He may be, but he's either very ignorant and he doesn't even ask those questions. He's just like, that's the leader of the Orthodox Church, or he's a cynical little sellout. But you got to remember, when Tucker asked that question, which was a great question, he said, our cities are falling apart over here, borders wide open, and you're more concerned about what tanks we're going to send to Ukraine. And Mike Pence was just seething with anger. Because let's just put it as a metaphor. Let's say you're going to a fresh produce convention where they sell fresh produce, cucumbers, tomatoes, so on and so forth. And you go up to the tomato salesman, and let's say there's a breakout speech keynote happening, and the tomato salesman is coming up to give his presentation about why you need to buy more tomatoes for your grocery store chain, right? So it's an industry convention. And so you're the moderator. And so while you're on stage with that guy, you're like, you know what? You've been telling a lot of stuff about how awesome it is to have tomatoes. You've been saying that we should eat tomatoes because they give us vitamin C. You've been saying we should have tomatoes because they make children happy. They've been having tomatoes because families are stronger and healthier when they eat tomatoes. You've been talking about how tomatoes help the economy. But what about the fact that crime is going through the roof while your tomato sales have been going up, and poverty is going through the roof, drugs are pouring into our lives while your tomato sales have been going up? You haven't fixed that. And that tomato salesman is going to get angry, right? Because he's going to be like, look, I'm here to sell tomatoes.
Yeah.
In his mind, that's what you know what I'm saying? In his mind, he's like, I'm here to sell tomatoes, bro. That's what I do to have the mortgage payment that I have in the big, nice neighborhood that I have. That's how I get my kids in this university that they're going to, that I'm paying an arm and a leg for. That's how I get my wife that extra ring and that extra designer dress. That's how I feel like I am better than my rivals. That's how I feel like I have surpassed my father, or whatever it is that motivates them, right? And all of that's in their head. And they're like, what are you doing? Bugging me about poverty in the streets, drugs going through the roof, and telling me that me selling more tomatoes ain't going to solve that. That's what you got to understand, is going through the mind of these dumb clowns, these politicians, when they're being questioned with actual questions from a person who has a conscience, who has a brain, who has a heart, like Tucker. And when you put them in that context, they're going to melt, because the job of the politician is like a tomato salesman. They are selling the establishment donor class that has parasitically been eating off of the middle class's assets for decades and decades and decades. And they're selling the establishment, I'm the kind of Pied Piper that will keep these peasants happy with my rhetoric and deliver on the interest that you need. That's the dynamic of the sales presentation that they're delivering there. You see what I mean? They're saying, look, I am here to sell the masses on happiness with the status quo. And I'm here to do that in a way that keeps things smoothly going forward. They're not here to have people sit there and start deconstructing the failure of their business. They're there to sell they're there. The politicians are there to sell the establishment business interests, to say, hey, look, I'm going to take care of your war munitions sales. I'm going to take care of your pharmaceutical sales. I'm going to take care of your ideological impositions about deconstructing gender in a Foucault way. Like, I'm going to take care of all the things that the special interests who want me to be their pick, I'm going to take care of their interests. And in exchange, I'll show them that the masses can be easily lulled by my rhetoric to go along with the special interest. And that's the presentation that they're all making. Asa Hutchins, Mike Pence, all of these folks are making that sales presentation.
Yeah, it's very depressing to see on one aspect that the people who are interested to stay in power or to run for power have no concern whatsoever for the people who are going to vote for them. And it just makes me think, like back to what you said, is that these people, particularly Mike Pence, is indeed playing a role where it's like he's preparing himself as a, in terms of pro wrestling, he's preparing himself to, get pinned at the highest pay-per-view, right? He's preparing
Yeah.
himself to basically like, this is okay, I'm going to be the bad guy that the Democrats, that their handpicked leader Joe Biden is going to beat. So I'm preparing myself for that role, like the role of a loser. And again, this is why they become why they are so eager to jump on the role of a loser, is because uh, they're not really looking out for the best interest of the people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the point that I just want to reiterate is that the reason why these politicians look so dismally just completely useless is that they're, especially when they're given questions that actually reveal how paper thin their character persona is that they are not there for the thing that they present themselves to be there for. They're not there, I just want to earn your vote. No, they are selling themselves to the donor class, and the donor class is looking at these con artists, and they're saying which of these con artists will most effectively be able to gin up cultural energy, the crowd spirit, in a way that pacifies and delights and creates some catharsis if they're able to have power, right? That's what they're negotiating. And it's not all about winner takes all for president. So many of the media class icons today got there because they ran for president or they were on a political campaign that had some success in a campaign, right? So, Mike Huckabee, right? He's been a media figure for some time. All these folks, Sarah Palin, Ted Cruz has, built his Senate campaign, and he does a lot of, his Senate career, and he's done a lot of speaking events and so forth. And so everybody's trying to get their little status thing. They're trying to make their money. They want to feel like they did something good. And that's okay. We all have that. I certainly don't do this program with the intention of wanting people to think that I'm doing something to make their lives miserable, right? Obviously, I'm doing something to try to make an impact. So there's nothing wrong with that on a base level. Where it becomes a problem, though, is that when people believe in the illusion that these politicians are trying to do the right thing, but they just get a little mixed up when they get to DC. Like, that's not true. These people are getting to DC because they have proven themselves to be a faithful servant to the multinational corporations that own DC. And they're faithful in two ways. Do they deliver through their voting and their actions on the policies and loot that those people want? And number two, do they pacify the voters in an effective way, right? Because nobody, the establishment and the DC donor class, they don't want to elect politicians that give them everything they want, but the people are hot mad at them, right? You know what I mean? That's not an effective person, right? Because then that means you got to deal with, expensive campaigns, right? You see what I mean? If you have an expensive campaign, that means more money you got to pay to keep that asset in power, voting to extract resources through theft from the masses to your industry or your nonprofit or whatever it is that you have. So the sweet spot when they're picking out politicians to own, and the White House is one of the most important roles for politician purchases, is to pick someone who is demonstrating an ability to rhetorically connect with the masses in a way so they're not expensive to keep in power. And number two, delivers very faithfully on the interests that own this country. Right. And so, if you put in somebody who is really good with rhetorically winning over the masses, but they say, yeah, I'm going to abolish the FDA and I'm not going to be for big pharma. I'm going to be for minerals and food and nutrients and local farmers. Like, what the heck is that going to do? What? That's going to piss off the tomato salesman for one, because he's got a business that's built on Walmart buying his mass-produced tomato with no nutrition. That's not going to help. If I'm going to empower the local farmer to get food directly to your local town, and I'm going to, and here's how I'm going to do it by getting this parasitical, deeply captured agency out of your way, the USDA, and I'm going to get the FDA out of here so that big pharma doesn't have an exclusive leg up on, natural ways of healing diseases or dietary corrections. I mean, who's going to pay for the billions it costs to put that kind of a president in the White House? So it doesn't matter if they're, and that's why they don't like people this is the thing. They don't like people. The media doesn't like people who are rhetorically effective with the masses, meaning they are able to gin up deep love from the affections of the masses and who actually carry out their principles that contradict their financial interests. Those are very deadly, dangerous people. And anybody who gets slightly close in that direction, like a Trump or a RFK Jr. or whoever, right? Those are the ones that are going to be most targeted for media hit pieces and manipulation of the American people's minds to war against them.
Well, I want to ask you a question. What happened? Like we were talking about, we briefly mentioned, I guess, like back in 2012, Ron Paul, when he was talking about ending all these wars and bringing the troops home and just a non-interventionist approach to the presidency, and he got booed during the primaries. But right now, we are seeing Tucker Carlson. I recently watched an interview of his with Russell Brand, and on that interview, he briefly mentioned that he was ashamed to have been on board with the Iraq War, the whole drum beating that was going on there. So what happened between then and now? Why do we see such a reversal of roles in this anti-war stuff among the dynamic has changed between the Republicans and the Democrats. The Democrats are now pro-war. They have begun a rehabilitation campaign of all these, all these old guard neocons, like George W. Bush, and even to a certain degree Mike Pence, and these people who have been hated by the anti-war left back in the day, and now they are getting all of the primetime spots on the CNN, MSNBC, all these leftist liberal outlets. But right now the Republicans are viciously anti-intervention. Why did this shift take place?
Republicans are not. The Republican base.
The base, yeah, I'm talking about the base. I mean, even if you look at
they're still not, and this is my problem. We've got more work to do because they're still not anti-war deeply on the matter of it is wrong to kill. Okay, that's the problem, right? They're not there. They're anti-war, like we've done this long enough. We don't need to waste more money in this, or these never end. They're not successful, or who are we to try to tell the world? They're starting, which is good. There's a process to this unlearning of decades of lies. They're starting to understand who are we to want to be the policeman of the world. Who are we to try to teach Afghanistan people to be third wave feminists? Like, so some of this stuff is good. They're rolling it back, but they're still not at the level of it is a despicable, moral, heinous thing to lie as a justification to initiate murderous violence against another people. Like they're still not there yet, because that's the hardest thing. That's the hardest thing for humans to come to face for any nation. How do the Irish folks? They're still mad at the other Irish folks feel about the violence in their past, right? How does the Indians on the border of Pakistan feel about the violence that have gone? When you get down to things that people have been most passionately supportive, it's hard to get them to drill down and say, yes, it is wrong for us to be killing somebody else. Because we always want to use our death anxiety as an excuse to say, well, we need to be over there so they don't get us. But so there's a lot there. But one of the things we got to start with from the foundational standpoint, you asked what changed from Ron Paul to now, right? Well, think about this. What was the technology? What was the leading edge media technology we had at the start of the Iraq War in 2003?
It was mainstream news, right? Like Fox, CNN.
Did you have a smartphone in 2003?
Mm-hmm.
Did the masses have smartphones? Did the masses have
no one had that kind of access to information.
So that's what the big change was, in my opinion, which helped accelerate America's remembrance of the cost of war, right? Because they understood the cost of war in other periods of time. World War I, World War II were very hard for the American people to be lied into.
What about I get what you're saying, but what about like this reversal, like I mentioned, right? Like the Democrats, if you speak to the average blue voter, they are perfectly okay with sending billions of dollars to help defeat it.
Because we got to get there. So the way you get there, you got to understand the media technology is changing this. So 2008 comes around and Obama gets in, right? And the Democrats felt like psychologically, by electing a person of color with the name of Hussein, that they had participated in cathartic resolution to the bloodletting of the Iraq War.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. See what I mean? But they felt so good about. I'm serious. This is why the establishment is so brilliant with their. I mean, they know how to do propaganda. They thought by merely electing an articulate person who had an exotic middle name and an exotic upbringing, right? He was in Indonesia and all this stuff, and now he's a president. That was like their way of symbolically washing their hands for their participation in the Iraq War. Now, it was easier for them to do it because the Iraq War was so wedded to the neocon Republican brand of Bush. But of course, Hillary Clinton and John Kerry and all their little clowns that they love were all Joe Biden. They were all for the Iraq War too, but they didn't brand it as their thing as much. Right? They got off the bandwagon a little bit earlier than, the Republican neocon Bush types who were doubling down on that as part of their brand. So the Democrat base that was 1 million person on the street in 2004 for the RNC to protest the Iraq War, they felt like their interests were resolved when they elected Barack Hussein Obama, who campaigned on, because they literally think about psychologically for a second.
I mean,
I hate war. This is a corrupt war trying to kill a man named Saddam Hussein. I now elect a person of color with a middle name like Hussein. Therefore, I'm psychologically resolved. I've solved this war issue. Now, here's what happens at the same time. Here's another thing that's important. 2012 comes around. Now you have this Occupy Wall Street thing burgeoning up, right? This Occupy Wall Street thing is starting to build. So the question is, what's going to happen with all this interest? See, the Democrats were still more economically oriented at that time, right? And so they were concerned, people have talked about this in the past, that the establishment was concerned that this economic interest would spill out into disrupting some of Wall Street's interest. So that around that time, you see the shift go from economic progressivism as the main driving force of the party to now they're going to start to reach into the identity group stuff. And you get the identity group stuff worked on. So there's this weird relationship, I think, between a leftist movement, which is economic justice oriented, is going to be also foreign policy justice oriented. And once you shift it over to, gender identity and racial identity and that critical theory stuff, which starts really getting stronger and stronger around that time, now they're fixated on, instead of foreign policy crimes, their media is telling them, look at what happened to this young black man arrested, killed, or what I'm saying. So now they're getting their mind focused on white supremacy, white supremacy, white supremacy. At the same time, for decades, they've been seeing that Russia is the villain in all the Hollywood movies and programs. And then at the same time that this white supremacy thing is starting to really stick, you got these stories starting to really turn their Democratic base away from the classical anti-war, anti-big business framework to, racial grievance and these things like that. Now you've got this matter of the Trayvon Martin story, which really lights a fire under that racial grievance narrative, right? And now people are focused on, things going on in people's own backyard. Because again, Barack Obama, here's the other thing you got to understand. Barack Obama was perpetuating all these drone strikes and continuing with, escalating in Libya and Syria. And the Democrats had a psychological break, the mainstream base of, right? Because they had to decide, wait a second. When Bush was in power, media said, go to Iraq war. My Democrat boys said, go to Iraq war. Bush said, go to Iraq war. Then the media jumped ship and the Democrats jumped ship rhetorically, and Bush doubled down on it. Therefore, I hated Bush because he was presented to me as an evangelical Christian, right? And that was always something you're supposed to really hate. So evangelical Christians believe in waiting till marriage and bombing people around the Middle East. Therefore, I believe in sexual liberation and not bombing people around the Middle East, right? So then you vote for Barack Obama, which is your way of kind of like purging the old white evangelical base that hates sexual impurity and loves bombing brown people, right? That's what you felt like you did in 08. But the media is now, but the media is now selling them with Barack Obama in the helm, with drone strikes, with the Arab Spring, with Libya, with Syria. And they had a psychological break back then, because they're like, wait a second. So brown people are still being killed. Drone strikes are happening more than ever before. Media is saying we need to do this. And the guy named Barack Hussein Obama, who I thought would have purged this out, he's going along with it too, with his flowery rhetoric in tow. But he's also pointing out that Trayvon Martin looks like he could have been his son, and that psychologically orients themselves to say, oh, wait, so the problem is police and white supremacy in our own homeland. So they start getting gamed in that, because they have a psychological break, because a certain amount of people, certain percentage of the population, what they see on TV is what they think is a window to reality, right? It's just like, that's what reality is. So Libya war is good. We have to be there. And that's a little bit of cognitive dissonance. Syria war is good. We got to be there. That's what the TV is telling them. More cognitive dissonance. But Barack Obama is saying, hey, look at these shootings over here, or look at this, or look at that. And he was even doing it in a much milder way than what they do now about it, right? But that allowed them to start to focus on things that, they could still feel, because the number one thing that they don't want to feel is shame, right? You don't want to feel the shame of, wait a second, I've been hoodwinked. I'm an idiot. I fell for a middle name brand. And even though they're still killing millions of people and I'm voting for them again, what's wrong with me? I'm a freaking idiot hypocrite. They can't do that.
I mean, if you look at the average Democrat voter, I would say it's like, looks something like a single mom, and when she sees this recording of media recordings of Gaddafi and his female bodyguards, like, oh my god, so misogynistic, oh my god. But when you go tomorrow and ask her, oh yeah, Karen, I noticed that you were getting your panties in a bunch when you notice that Gaddafi video, but do you know there's a slavery going on in Libya today? What's going on in Libya today? It's not covered in CNN. So that's the kind of mentality they have, right? it's a hypocritical
Not even
mentality.
about, but yeah, I mean, that's part of it. But really,
I just wanted to
about
give an
the Democrat base are about status. They want to be hip. They want to be cool. We talked about this last time. They want to be hip. They want to be cool. They're very sensitive to that. They're very sensitive to what is the latest trendy fad, and that includes their political voices that they're supposed to um, parrot, right? So, it's not hip and cool. The Iraq War was the media was all for it, and I still don't understand exactly why the media kind of turned on that war. What was in their interest? Maybe they just felt like, there's always competing factions of interventionists in the oligarchic mafia, that are pushing for this war, not that war. So there's some of that going on that trickles out into the way media can turn on wars. But they did turn on the Iraq war at some point, and they kind of pigeonholed it on that's Bush, and anybody who's a white Republican conservative, that's their shame, not ours, right? Because they elected Barack Obama, which is like a sign that they were not guilty of that atrocity. But then when Barack Obama didn't close Gitmo, he didn't persecute Haspel and all those other crooks that were involved with black
and he was
site.
the first to persecute the whistleblowers, right? Julian
Yeah.
Assange and Snowden.
But I mean, you don't understand how big that torture thing was, man. That torture thing was huge for the Democrat base about closing Gitmo. That was a symbol of shame, and you had Cindy Sheehan. And again, so for some reason, the corporate media, for whatever reason, there's probably a lot there that we have to research and understand what was going on. For some reason, the corporate media kind of turned hard on that Iraq war to some degree and allowed voices like Cindy Sheehan, who was the mother of the soldier who died, to be elevated, similar to how like Trayvon Martin's story was elevated later on, right? That elevation of the grieving Cindy Sheehan, the mother of the soldier who dies for the unjust war. The media really was involved with some of that, obviously not to the extent that they were in terms of supporting its start and maintenance in the first few years, but they really turned hard against it leading up to Barack Obama's election. And I just think for a variety of reasons that kind of helped lead to this purging cathartic effect of putting Barack Obama in power. And then they had to deal with the cognitive dissonance of him keeping that bloodshed going. So therefore, they had to psychologically break from foreign policy as their focal point, right, of what's just, and move into domestic matters that, the media would elevate and stop. Because the media did not pay attention. Here's something, maybe call it affirmative action. The media did not scrutinize the horrors of the Libyan war like they did the Iraq war, did they? And they didn't scrutinize the ugliness going on in the Arab Spring in Syria and blame that on Barack Obama like they did the ugliness that went on in Iraq for Bush, right? So maybe that's affirmative action media or whatever, but that's clearly a difference in media coverage of those atrocities, right? So that allowed those who lived in that media-owned bubble to hide their eyes from the carnage as well, right? You remember, because the media was more, every day when the Iraq war started going bad, the media, New York Times would blast, 50 more people dead today, and 50 more Americans dead today, this man dead today. That was like a steady every day. It was like exhausting, spiritually demoralizing. And we were doing that for other interests, other countries' interests. Can you believe that? I mean, every day picking up the paper, more Americans dead, more Iraqis in disarray, more suicide bombings. And you're like, for what? Well, it's certainly not America's interest. It was foreign interest that we were doing that for, and they didn't get anything out of it for here at home. So that's where, and here's where the right comes into its anti-war status again. Ron Paul played a big role in this, but the environment there was that the right were the ones sending their children disproportionately to go do this carnage. Right. So people in Alabama and people in Colorado or people like that who were going off to fight these wars more than the folks in New York City and LA and Martha's Vineyard. And so they're seeing the effects of this war, and their soldiers are coming back and saying, why did I go do this? What was the point of this? Right. And then remember, the Republicans had been sold that you're a tough guy you're a man's man if you don't cut and run, right? If you just keep on going on and on and on with the war. Well, they see Barack Obama, who's this metropolitan figure, right? He's this metro character, right? Very elitist. This isn't what their
Yeah.
brand is. And he's going on with more wars. What? I thought that was the status symbol for tough guys, country boy. You know what I mean? That's what they were sold after 9/11, right? That tough boys, real men, go off and fight wars for Halliburton and OPEC and all that. But they didn't, they weren't sold it that way. But that's what their identity of high status for working class white people in conservative world was, to be a man and be tough. You just keep on going till Dick Cheney's made his money. And so, to see this elitist liberal guy who's, doing all these weird globalist things, and he's pushing more wars. Now that stupid pro wrestling brand of real men just keep on going for war every day, and liberals are the ones who talk about ending the war. That's now ruined because Barack Obama had to just do this his master's bidding. He kept the wars keeping on going. So that comes around. You've got years of the Iraq war grinding up people who are coming home in body bags with limbs broken and psychological, moral injury and PTSD, and families are broken. There's a lot of carnage that's being processed. And Trump comes along and says, hey, so what Trump did that allowed the Republican Party to shift non-interventionist is he allowed people's insecure masculinity to stay intact and shift anti-war. Whereas Ron Paul was more of a prophetic voice where he's like, why would we do this? He's talking more like what I'm talking about, like the moral rights of what you're doing. This is wrong to kill people. And then Ron did some good populist rhetoric too. Like, why are we paying to blow up bridges over there while our bridges are falling down over here? Trump later used that line, right? That's a very populist. So it's not getting into, we are wrong to kill. You're avoiding that question, which hits at the heart, that stings like really bad, right? And you don't want to sting too much if you're part of a political campaign. You want to feel like you're the winner, right? And that's why politics is the antithesis of Christianity, because Christianity is about repentance and letting go of the self. Politics is about obfuscation, shifting the blame, and keeping the self as big and deceitful as ever, right? So politics and Christianity are going to be at odds,
So
fundamentally, as Caiaphas and Jesus shows, by the way. Go ahead.
Yeah, do you think like the rights, I'm talking about the base here, the reason why they are so anti-interventionist right now is due more to a mimetic rivalry with the left rather than of repentance?
There's always that. There's always these things. There's not either or. There's always, people do things with mixed motives. So you can't just say, oh, it's all rivalry or it's all this or that. It's like there's mixed motives in most of what humans do. And you don't know the motives that motivate you. Some of them you may be aware of, and some of them you're not. You're blinded to it. That's why we call it a blind spot. But my point in just saying that, it made it easier because repentance takes a long time. For a lot of folks, it takes years, and collective repentance takes a long time because it's a collective action. It's hard to know whose fault is what and how you're supposed to process what you did. Right? You know what I mean? If it's a crowd of people tears apart someone and you just grabbed a piece of the shirt, in your opinion, you didn't kill them or hit them. You just tore a piece of their t-shirt off. And then in an ecstasy of violence, right? That's a lot harder and longer sometimes to process what you did than if you were the individual killing someone one-on-one, right? That's a lot more of an acute moral responsibility. But when you have a crowd effect, like 50 million people voting for a candidate who keeps war going or blah, 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 that's a process that messes with your head on different levels. And like, am I responsible for that, or to what extent? And what am I supposed to do to stop that? Right. And let's give the American people credit. They voted for George W. Bush because he said we were going to have a humble foreign policy. He was the peace candidate when Bush was running. He said no more wars. They put in him, he goes supercharged wars for special interests and foreign powers. So then the American people say, okay, Barack Obama says he's going to stop the torture and stop the war. So they elect the other peace candidate, Barack Obama, and he keeps them going, keeps the nonsense going. And then 2016, Trump comes along. He says no more wars. And he didn't start a new war, but he kept on drone strikes. He killed innocent people. He kept on lying about the need to go after Iran and all that. So he didn't do enough. But he didn't start a new war. He didn't start a new war, and that's why he's the first one to be, in my opinion, criminally indicted in this context of where we're at, you know?
I get what you're saying, but I'm not so sure if we can give credit to the quote unquote American people for the 2016, because as far as I can, and I'm not just trying to, push back, I'm just trying to, sparse this out, is that Trump lost the popular vote in 2016, as far as I can remember.
That doesn't mean anything. That doesn't mean anything, because the way the Electoral College works, you dump your ads in the states that you need to win, right? So you spend your ground game and your ad game, which is where all your money goes for your campaign, working the states you need to get the electoral numbers you need most efficiently. So if it was a national campaign where you had to winner takes all, that would require a different kind of campaign where they're campaigning more aggressively and doing door-to-door knocking to get voters out in California and New York. When in an electoral college campaign, they don't even put ads up, and they don't do a lot of ground game in places like New York and California, where there's a large voting population that will vote right too, but it's such a number difference. Let's say it's 60-40 Democrat to Republican in California. You could spend millions of dollars and lots of door knocking and make that more, 50, 55, 45 or something like that. But you still lost. And that's a huge chunk of electoral votes to just go to the Democrats, and you wasted all that money. But your popular vote total would have reflected that tighter get out the game, get out the vote effort in California. You get what I'm saying? If you had a national campaign, it would reflect in different numbers. So this idea that, he lost by the popular vote was an indication that he wasn't as, desired or whatever. I mean, they both had high negatives, but the way the Electoral College sets up the voting game, you're going to pour money into those swing states that you can win, which is going to reflect in a way where it looks like basically there's a lower turnout in certain population areas for the red candidate, the Republican candidate, that if you were running a national campaign, you would turn those out more, and you would have more of a closer national vote. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's very interesting. I'm just, trying to. It's very fascinating how you explained it. I guess.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, like think about it. Like if all you need to do is win Florida, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, right? But their numbers, their populations of those states are so small compared to California, New York. So you don't spend any money in California, New York. So you're not really revving up the base potential that you could turn out if you really wanted to there, because you're spending your resources on maximizing winning by 10,000 votes in Michigan, 5,000 votes in Pennsylvania, and you get the numbers, and the numbers is what you need to win the Electoral College. That's all that matters. So I don't know. I do think that it was obviously not a morally, not a sweeping win, but the idea that he lost the popular vote is an indication that the general American people majority really wanted to keep wars going. I don't think you can read into that at all. Actually, I think the fact that it was so close that he was able to win, despite having all of the establishment, the Republican Party was disavowing him like weeks before he won, and the Democrats were doing their thing, and the media was hitting them with all this stuff. I mean, it was like there had never been anything that 100% opposed to a candidate in the general election like that. And with all the flubs and all of the goofy things he was doing, and for him to still win showed a reflection that there probably was millions and millions more who didn't vote for him that were supporting and echoing that anti-establishment sentiment. But they just didn't turn out because of, the way the electoral politics. It's hard to get someone. It's easy to get someone to say, "Hey, I like what you said on Facebook. I'll hit a like." But it's harder to get someone to get in a car, remember the dates of when they're supposed to vote, right? Have their ID with them, find out where the precinct is that they're supposed to vote in. Like, where is it at? Is it at this church or is it at this building? Where is that at? And then to go out and do that. The kind of people who are going to be most hateful of the establishment are the kind of people who don't want to have nothing to do with, I got to get up, go on this date, which is Tuesday, have my ID or whatever it is and your voter registration or whatever your thing is you need, and go in there and take, 10 minutes of my time or 20 minutes of my time participating in a process that kind of affirms the legitimacy of a system that they have long ago written off. That's a high ask. And to get people to do that on the same day, right? That's why the Democrats have been so, now we're going off on a tangent, but that's why the Democrats have been so effective with this whole ballot harvesting thing, right? Because they realized that so many of their voters are low info who are also checked out of the system, right? And they realized, wait a second, this isn't a good marketing idea to say, hey, all you people who don't want to be involved with the system, you want to live in the underground economy, you want to do whatever you want to do, be high on drugs 24/7, be unemployed, whatever you want to do. Like, we've got lots of people who would affirm our interests in that category. Because Democrats are the party of, promising man children, like results endlessly. So like, think about that. Somebody in their little team said, wait a second, why are we trying to tell all these guys to show up on one day within a certain hour? Some of these people don't even wake up till it's 10 o'clock when the voting has stopped. You know what I mean? They're not waking up till 10 o'clock. So they said to themselves, we could totally pack way more numbers if we start doing this ballot harvesting where you got a whole apartment complex and you got one little busybody, Martha, you know what I mean? And she's going to go in there and make sure everybody's ballots are filled out, whether they did it or their cousin did it or their brother did it or whoever it is. They're just going to, all right, we got this many homes in this apartment. We got this many ballots. We got this guy. I don't even know if that uncle's still alive. It don't matter. All of these ballots are going in that bin. That's an easier way to get the numbers up.
Well, say, it appeals to
you all have to, and that could be done for months, right? You could do that for months, having Marthas and all these little activists with money flooded in from dark money and special interest money, people who want murderous wars and murderous banking, destruction of economies and all this sick stuff. You got money, you can flood at all these little grassroots community organizers with very fancy algorithms and numbers to look at where all the voting, potentials are, and just harvest ballots all day long.
Well, it's I think it's tailored to this very consumeristic mind, right? Like the kind of mind that likes to consume, whether it's on pharmaceutical drugs or whether it's to consume information curated by legacy press. So it's like this ballot harvesting that you're talking about. Like, people don't want to be like a consumeristic mind. They don't want to be told to, they don't want a call to action, right? They want that call to come to their doorstep. And this is where we get this mentality, like people, despite having a bookstore or something right next door, they'd rather order something online, like from Amazon or from Jeff Bezos or whatever. So that's the kind of people who are ready to, accept this 15-minute city kind of thing that these people are trying to put out. They're ready to accept this social security, this social identification, digital currency, and so on, so on. So
The Democrats are the party of man children. That's what their whole brand is about. And that doesn't mean, dumb people would say, well, that means you're saying Republicans don't have man children policy. No, they do too.
oh, they have,
But but the Democrat Party is like fine-tuned man children policy. They're all about life is rigged against you. You let the empire take care of you. Surrender your brain to our hive mind, and we'll feed you, we'll clothe you, we'll give you education, we'll give you affirmations. You want to be morbidly obese? Be even bigger. It's healthy. We'll tell you over and over again it's healthy until you stupidly Pavlovian believe that your morbidly sick situation that has been caused by their multinational food-based, donors, right, that run their apparatus in D.C., they'll tell you until they're blue in the face. Yeah, your sickened state that we put you in, does it hurt your feelings if we say you're sick? Okay, man child, you're healthy. That's what they do. Okay,
Yeah,
child. Lizzo, that's what they're all about. Low effort, entitlement. I am a god by my mere existence. That's the Democrat brand. And that's why when Lizzo comes out, they say, that is beautiful. And they say, if you say that she's needs to change for her health reasons, then you're shattering her fragile ego and millions more like her. And so therefore, you're the scapegoat monster to be destroyed. But yeah, their whole deal is all about validating man children stupidity, which is the inevitable result will be ballot harvest. Well, hey, it's violence to ask you to get up and vote. They literally have convinced that. They have convinced millions of people. Mostly it's probably white people, but blacks too. They've convinced them that it's racist for black people to be asked to show their ID to vote, right? That's racism. Not, to have a basic mechanism of order is racism. That's what their whole thing is about. Showing up on time for work. Your boss says, at our restaurant, we start at 6 a.m. cleaning and getting things ready for the day. And you show up at 7. And you say, excuse me, we said that your time was 6, that you had to come in. And you're supposed to say, no, that's white supremacy that cares about me showing up on time. So it's inevitable. Bread and circuses, debased empires that are wicked to the core. When it comes to an infectious disease, you're not allowed to look at what your empire did to cook up that disease. You're supposed to believe it popped out of a soup or whatever the hell they said at the time. And you got all these little cuck losers like Mark Zuckerberg who spend their entire life just being handmaidens to the empire with disinformation, censoring intelligent men from telling the truth about the origins of their stupid disease. And then millions of people die. And then millions of people are told, well, all you got to do is take this shot. That's the easy man-child answer, right? The easy man-child answer is somebody cooked up something new, brought to you by, right? And then you take it, and that's it. You don't got to change your seed oil consumption. You don't got to think. When you want to get better, you have to actually think. You have to say, wait a second, sunlight is healthy. I can't put sunscreen on. Well, there's a corporation that sells sunscreen. There's not a corporation that sells sunlight. And then you've got, so you have to actually think, wait, if I have sunlight, that means I have to go out. But if I've been eating seed oils a lot, that means I'm going to get sunburned violently, which is a problem. And that's discomfort. Man children don't like discomfort. When you read the literature like we did at the time, and we said that you might need to look into seed oil consumption because of the science behind linoleic acid being the cause of severe acute respiratory distress syndrome in COVID patients, I just said a sentence that how much percentage of the Democratic base would never be able to possibly bother with comprehending? They have the potential to, but they have chosen a lifelong man-child mindset. Like that sentence I just said, linoleic acid built up in your body creates the pathway for severe acute respiratory distress in COVID-19 patients. Mind blown. Now, when you have a voter base, which like 70, 80% of them wouldn't even bother to even consider that because it wasn't brought to you by Pfizer on NBC today, Tonight Show, that stupid corporate vanilla trash. That is a gift that keeps on giving for oligarchs. And they want to make that base as dumb and as big as possible. Right?
Do you think that this man-children mentality, do you think that is being brought on by this acceleration of technology that seeks to make everything much more convenient for us, or do you think it's something more than that? Like,
say the question
okay,
again.
so for example, people are used to getting things at their homes, right? And now they want to get used to the getting the votes from their
Sure.
homes.
Yeah.
So
For sure.
yeah, I mean, like they want to, like people, they don't want to go to the store and check out the products anymore. They want to order things from the internet. And the same thing is like it's same. I think the same is with like we've discussed ballot harvesting, and they want to, and it's just not that in terms of like getting things. It's like they want the easy way out, right? So for example, you mentioned like people have to think in terms of like when you get sick, what kind of food am I eating? Am I eating seed oils? But they don't want that. They want an easy one injection fixes everything, that kind of solution.
Seed oils, azithromycin, the nature of deep capture of regulatory agencies.
Yeah,
To them, that's like me sitting down during their favorite CGI Marvel movie and saying, let me explain to you the program that makes that 3D graphic pop out of Captain Planet's shield or whatever. They don't want to hear that. That's boring, nerd, weird, confusing. I'm scared. What's happening? I can't take it. So they want, give me the vaccine, tell me what to eat, tell me that it's okay to be massively obese or sick and just embrace it. It's the easiest path. And yes, technology, of course, can help with that, right? But can help accelerate that and intensify that. Going back to the media ecology thing, I did mention that 2003, the Iraq War, you didn't have smartphones. Now, during, you were asking like what changes and makes America more reflective against the wars again, is smartphone technology helps, right? Because now you can get indie channels like our program dissenting against the war, right? And you can watch it in HD, and you can have HD visuals filmed by independent journalists, Americans, some of them, in the war zone, right? Giving real-time counter facts that are actually true against what NBC and CBS, brought to you by Pfizer or whatever, want you to believe, right? So now there's actual voices of dissent, which are in some cases, connected to voices of the victim that are able to speak back in real time and cause lack of trust in the prevailing narratives of including war. I also think that smartphone technology in some way for the Democrat mind allowed them to focus on, things happening in the domestic scene, like, police brutality, right? Because more people with smartphones are able to distribute content in American social media about things that happened down the street from them when they caught it while they were walking down the sidewalk than they are Barack Obama's wars in Syria and the Arab Spring. Like, you know what I mean? There's more, it's just obvious, right? There's more people in America with smartphones, with access to smartphones and high-speed internet and social media and the language to distribute content about domestic abuses rather than foreign policy abuses. I think that helps, is all I'm saying. That might have helped the Democrat base shift its moral outrage away from foreign policy atrocities, right?
Uh,
See what I'm saying?
don't
I
you
just
think
wanted to
that
point it out.
don't you think that there's a religious aspect to this as well, other than technology? I mean, like when I think about that, it's somehow okay to bomb brown people as long as you vote into office a person named Hussein. That kind of reeks of, like, okay, Father, forgive me, I've committed sin. Say three Hail Marys and you will be good to go again. So that kind of reeks seeks seems similar in that sense. But what do you think about that? Do you think like this Christian sensibilities, Christians sensibilities towards certain sacraments or whatever, is that uh, reeking into uh, political, the way we do politics?
No, I think if you're truly taking the Christian Eucharist and all these things serious, then it wouldn't at all make you think that it's okay to vote for wars if its token symbols are put in place. No, I don't think so at all. And of course, the Democrat base. When I was describing that, I don't mean that they consciously thought that. Okay, they didn't think they didn't support voting for the Iraq War. So when
uh,
Barack Obama elected, what I'm saying is when Barack Obama gets elected by them, they felt like they were defeating and casting out that whole war cabal. And then they had severe cognitive dissonance for those who paid attention to realize that Barack Obama was engaging in more wars. But again, see, they're presented. See, think about it in 2012. Let me promote let me stand up for the Democrat base a little bit on the 2012 issue, right? Because you're thinking, okay, Barack Obama is up for re-election. He's proven himself to be a warmongering scoundrel like Bush. Okay, punish him. But who was the opposition? Mitt Romney, who was more neocon than Barack Obama, right? So, yeah, they had Ron Paul, but, to a TV owned mind, Ron Paul was but a sideshow. You only saw him a little bit on the Daily Show, and to its credit, that was good. Colbert, but they were still, that was considered to be, that was a margin show. The one anti-war voice was an enigma because he was a country doctor. He was old, right? He was Christian. He was mild mannered, looked like, Mr. Rogers and so forth. And so that wasn't part of their, they couldn't process like, okay, well, that's enough to make me switch to the Republican Party to support that guy. A
well,
lot of
it's
them
not
did.
so much about switching to the Republican Party, but what probably should have said is that yes, they don't consciously think about that. I mean, I don't think anybody is that much bothered about foreign policy. The average, I'm talking about the average person on the streets. That person is only bothered about, I think, at the most, taxes or minimum wage and things like that. But what I am saying is that they seem to unconsciously think that collectively, in the sense that, okay, right now, the person who is in office, he was riding shotgun with Barack Obama, and people knew what his policies on what his views on foreign policy was, right? People knew that. But they had okay, so in 2012 their alternative option was Mitt Romney. But in 2020 these people had someone like Donald Trump, who had never started a war. Like, okay, he wasn't able to you know end as many wars as he had promised, but nevertheless he was miles better than preceding presidents in terms of foreign policy, but they still went ahead with Joe Biden. People still came out and actually voted for that guy, right? So what are these people thinking in terms, like, do the average American don't think about foreign policy at all? or is it
But
like?
well, no, you don't. But that's what I've been setting up. If you follow what I'm saying on the media ecology, and if you're not, if it's not making sense, then maybe I can explain it more, try to make it more concise. But what I'm saying is there's media ecology that's transforming the framework of what people are going to focus on, right? So I said, so in 2003, we didn't have smartphones. So we had TV cameras and photographs, right? And so there's a different mindset in terms of how we're going to approach the gravity and the believability of the need to go to a war. And the American media and the global media sold people on going along with that, right? So so when you get to the era of the smartphone, okay, now we have a different focus from 2003 to 2016, 2017, 2018. Now there's a focus on what's immediately domestic, like the killing of George Floyd, right? So that takes precedent in terms of the framework of the narrative they've been shifting. Remember, in 2012, there's a move that you start to see to get Occupy Wall Street defanged, and that whole movement of we're tired of the big businesses. Big business is going to say we'll put up a rainbow flag and we'll do, racial politics aggressively if you just keep letting us make our billions of dollars in loot and bailouts and all that, right? That's basically the transition, and that's what they started voting. That's what the special corporate interest started funding in media narratives and entertainment. They were already doing it in the 80s and 90s. Political correctness is always a thing, but it really shifted up into the mainstream of democratic politics around that time, because big business realized that this economic progressivism was more dangerous to their interests than, identity politics. So identity politics starts to be cooked and cooked and cooked and cooked as media is making, people being able to live stream their neighbors being mistreated or their perspective on a police situation. And so now when Trump comes in and it's 2016 and he says, we need to get tougher on crime. We need to, when the police put the suspect in the back seat, don't protect their head from the roof of the car, throw them in there so their head gets hit. I mean, that's Trump's rhetoric, right? He says things that are about tough boundaries, right? We need to have more harsh sentencing for crime. So the Democrat mind has already spent 8 years making excuses, hiding their eyes from the atrocities of Barack Obama's foreign policy wars. And now here's this Trump guy saying, yeah, bring the troops home. But to be fair to the Democrat mind, Trump, as I said earlier, was couching the rhetoric in tough guy friendly language still, right? You see what I mean? He wasn't saying this is a moral indictment, what Barack Obama has been doing to kill brown people. He didn't say that. That would be rhetoric that would be rhetorically hijacking the liberal hive mind more. He was going to the base and the Republicans, and he was saying, that was a stupid war. We spent money. It was a lot. You know what I mean? It's more just, it's about corruption and politics. It's about money wasting. It's not about this is terrible because it hurts these poor people. He did do that later. He did start adding that rhetoric as he became president. I thought that was good. He actually started becoming more humanitarian and more human oriented in his critiques of the war machine. I thought that was good. I thought that was a sign that, again, he was off script. He was realizing the gravity of what is involved with being a war making empire, right? And he was starting to talk about that in his rallies, and you saw his audience moving with him. They were going on that journey with him and moving more and towards a moral indictment on war for its own human cost. Because I remember Trump, and he still does sometimes in a lot of his rallies in 2020 and stuff, he would talk about, well, let's talk about the human cost, not just to our own soldiers, but to the thousands that were killed on the other side in Iraq. That's very progressive, man, in terms of the true sense of the word progressive. in the Christian sense of the word progress, right? Barack Obama didn't even do that. That's what I mean. So you're right. You're right. I think it's complicated. You're right that you would think that the liberal mind who elected Barack Obama would have heard some of that rhetoric. They didn't really watch a lot of that rhetoric, only the clips, about him saying tough guy stuff usually is what made it over to their media ghettos. But if they were an attenuated, if they really listened carefully, some of the rhetoric he was saying was truly, genuinely way more anti-war and is more anti-war than Barack Obama. But they don't see things like that in the sense of, and then there's another factor I'm going to bring into that will make sense too. But they don't see the foreign policy stuff as immediately sensitive to their moral issues, like a police brutality filming on a cell phone video down the road. And so when Trump was taking the position of tough on crime, as they're seeing more and more videos about police brutality and all this stuff, that kind of washes out as Trump is part of fascist violent brutality, right? And Trump, to his part, played into that by being, I'm tough guy. I'm not really talking about the moral humanitarian element of these wars. Now, the other reason why the war machine has been so effective for the Democrat base and going along with it has been for years. Again, they painted Russians as everything they're supposed to hate from a Pavlovian sense, right? Putin is a nationalist. Putin is they painted the Russians as anti-LGBTQ, which is a cardinal sin in the Democrat, moral universe. And then they, of course, they associate them with, well, okay, they're white, right? So they didn't really say white nationalists. I'm sure they have probably if you look it up somewhere. But basically, Russia is a dangerous empire of white nationalist, anti-gay homophobes. That was the brand that the media has been cooking on the Russians for a long time, targeted towards the Democrats. And then when they had that whole psyop where they said the Russians hacked the 2016 election, now they felt like that was like a soft 9/11 for them. Hillary Clinton was supposed to win. This kind of weird, creepy, soft 9/11 happened. So any kind of foreign policy that was getting ready to launch in violence with Russia, the Democrat base has been long catechized that this was an inevitable thing that had to happen. And so it's easier to, when you've been told to dehumanize white people for a decade or so, it's easier to launch that war with Russia because it's white people dying, see what I mean? And so they couldn't, I don't think the Democrat base could stomach right now a full scale war with a nation like Iran right now. You see what I mean? And that's one of the reasons why the Republican Party, which is the off-brand party of power, sticks with the Iran antagonism more than the Democrat Party. You notice that? Because in 2023 America, the idea of having a full-scale war with a nation as big as Iran, which is bigger and wealthier than Iraq, that's a heck of a brutality that Democrats would not want to be associating with leading for a full-scale war on. So they don't. The Democrats were sold on the Syrian war to the point that, you still had in 18 or whatever that was, when places like The View were castigating Trump for moving like 10 troops out of Syria. And they're like, oh my goodness, the poor Kurds. So that was about, but they didn't really, but you notice they weren't really galvanized about the Syrian war. You notice that? They tried. The military industrial complex tried to push humanitarian stuff, and they did, MSNBC, all of them, about Aleppo and, the Syrian, the gas attacks. And they made movies about the white helmets. Remember that with Hollywood? But it never really galvanized their soul and spirit, right? The Democrat liberal base It was not like, yes, they got to kill those Syrians. Yeah, they were just not that excited about it. But because Trump was against it, they were for it, right? That was a mimetic thing. He's for it. Okay, we're against it. And I think even to some extent, when he started saying, let's stop these stupid wars, mimetic desire made the Democrats say, well, the Democrat base say, well, let's have some more wars. Because whatever Scary Man says, we say opposite. Scary Man says, let's stop murder. Let's have more murder. Why not? Let's try it. Maybe it's enlightening. Scary Man says, let's have less stupid wars. All right, let's have more stupid wars. Let's team up with the neocons now, So, and of course, the neo-libs and the neocons were always of the same tribe politically. They were always warmongering. You know what I mean? So, neoconservatism comes out of this Trotskyite movement, which splits from the socialists, and the communists, and goes against them on some things. But it's not that far away ideologically for neocons to be reintegrated back into the Democratic voter base, because they share the same fundamental worldview of a welfare state, a warfare state, policemen of the world, central banking, some of the basic tenets of empire and welfarism and interventionism are all shared by these different variations of liberalism.
Well, I want to talk about a bit more about how that liberal mind is made, and I do notice among them that they have this tendency to think in the abstract rather than in on an individual one-to-one plane. So the Soren Kierkegaard came out with this essay that he wrote about this. Is called the present age, and in it he talks about how mass media is and I don't know if it's just the mass media, but he zeroes in on the mass media. He talks about how the mass media is training all of us to think in a way that is very collectivistic and very abstract. So one example he gave was you will often hear this word public in the media, the American public, or like the Democrat public or whatever. So it really has no meaning outside of mass media. But if you like, they will really help you to think in terms of individual one-on-one basis. I don't know how what does this mean? What does the Ukraine war mean for your neighbor next door, or so and so, and Mr. Rogers next door, or Mrs. and Stevenson, at your workplace? They will never make you think in that regard. And I think that is kind of true when how Democrats think, because they will say, okay, yeah, invasion is bad, invasion for a foreign country is bad, and this and that, but they will rarely do anything or make an effort to get an experience with a person who is on ground zero at that specific at that at the topic that they're discussing about, right? Like they will rarely try to make an effort to talk to an Ukrainian about what he or she thinks, but they are eager to think in the abstract, and that's why they are really hot on key topics, like abortion, women's rights, and so on. But they are really concerned about the individual woman. So I just want to get your opinion on that. Is that true, or do you think there's something more that you can add to that, or do you have a opinion that is contrary to that?
I don't think that thinking in abstract is like unique in any way to a Democrat mind. I think it's much
Well,
bigger
I'm
than
not.
that.
Maybe I'm not talking. Maybe I should have said that not just Democrats, but maybe among the Republicans too. I mean, this is
Just the
the
liberal,
kind of, yeah.
it's the liberal worldview of the whole world that's in that. How many people think? How many people think from first principles? What percentage of the population of any country thinks from first principles? First of all, that's such a small percentage of the population. Like, how many people in Japan are deeply, questioning of the fundamental presuppositions of what it means to be Japanese and the worldview of what it means to be Japan and relate, what does it mean to be a member of society? How do you deconstruct the social hierarchy? I mean, very few people are self-aware to step outside of their Truman Show, right? And really, they most people accept the abstract because the abstract is where the mythosphere is, right? That's where the sphere of mythology is, right? So I agree with you. I would agree that the Democratic base, I'm agreeing with you in the sense that the Democratic base seems to be more fundamentalist in their acceptance of the mainstream mythosphere, right? The mainstream myths of our time. The Republicans seem to be more geared up at this stage in our republic to be a little bit more reflexively contrarian to what the TV says. TV says get the product that will save your life, right, from this disease. And there's a large segment of the Republican base that says, I don't think so. Let me think about that. That's good. Why? And the Democrats were supposed to be like that too, right? The Democrats in the 60s and stuff were supposed to be the ones that said, the TV says we should be in Vietnam. I say no more war, right? TV says we have to be monogamous with, leave it to beaver lifestyle. I say free love, man. Let's do psychedelic stuff and try find our true self instead of this fixated, this kind of truncated imperial religion or whatever that they were reacting to in their head. So, but something happens, right? You're saying what happens? Why is it now that they're in this fundamentalist acceptance of the narrative of the establishment? I think it's the narrative of the establishment has been more geared towards hyper sensitivity to differentiation being eradicated. And in the haunting of the cross that we're all undergoing, in the shadow of the cross, if you gear your narratives towards picking at the injustices of differentiation, that's a winner's narrative, or at least for some time. See what I mean? And that's why I think the establishment has been so successful. And so when you look at like the Democrat worldview or the liberal worldview in that way, when they say stuff like hate has no home here. Okay, hate has no home here. What does that mean? Love is love is love is love is love. Okay, like you said, it's very abstract.
Well, it doesn't really
No,
mean anything if you
yeah,
have no
exactly.
person to apply it on.
Yeah. Love is love is love is love because there's lots of people who were predated into the lifestyle that they're saying love is love is love is love. They were predated and groomed into it at a young age. So it's not just love is love is love is love. It's pain, it's lies, it's deception, it's manipulation, it's predation. There's all that too. Or love is love is love is love. What about the person who was convinced when they were a child to do surgery to take their breasts away and now they regret it because they realized that was just a teenage phase of angst and disassociation that they could have been integrated through. But because they got swept up into a fad, they did a life-altering decision that absolutely harms them and makes them further disrupted from their body than it was before, right? They don't have a voice for that. Like you said, that individual neighbor who's affected by the love is love is love is love is love. So what love is love is love is love is love is just mental illness caused by fatherlessness, right? By and large, it's
It's
people
a
who
coping with the mental
don't want
illness,
to,
right? It's
what?
it's it's a media taught. It's a coping mechanism how to deal with the mental illness as presented by the media, right? Love is love is love is love is how you cope with the absence of a father.
and disappointments and betrayals and all those things that happens with families. So they're trying to say, look, what the liberal mind gets into is they look at the brokenness of things. They say, well, the family should have a father and a mother and children and extended family. And they say, well, when you say that's the preference, what about people who don't get that? What about people who were raised by one grandma? Is their love not as good? So it's hypersensitive about egalitarian sharing of feelings and emotions, which again has its place. But when that becomes the dominant thing, then you are elevating childish values. That's why I said man-child values, right? What guides that liberal mindset is a man-child sense of aesthetic and ethics, right? Because there's no grounding into self-emptying, forgiveness, grace, mercy, patience, long-suffering, none of those things are baked into it's just an emotional reaction like a child, right? Who didn't get what they wanted. If you're then if that's all you have is that little sound in your head, then that's, like you said, it's a coping mechanism to try to numb the pain from life not working out exactly as you felt you were entitled to. And so it's a kind of mantra that wants to break all differentiation apart. All boundaries must be eliminated in order for them to stop feeling the pain they feel. Right. So that's why it's a perpetual political machine to some degree until it gets stamped out by, like an invading army or something like that. But once that contagious sensibility starts, it just eats itself continuously, because you'll always find a boundary that has to be perpetually warred against. And those boundaries do not ever fully get eliminated. They just get sublimated and they go underground. You know what I mean? And so they, like trying to stamp out masculinity. You can't do it. It's just going to go underground, and it's going to pop out in different ways. Like people have said in some of these debates, feminism requires men to defend it, because, so many of the things that society takes for granted, if you were to have breakdown of civil society and the electric grid is completely out and police services are completely shut down, a lot of millions of people who talk a big game about how, there is no difference in gender, it's all deconstructed, they're going to get real binary real quick. Okay. Those binaries are going to come back real fast. Ain't nobody been walking around saying, I am joining the non-binary pact of roving, marauders. No, they're going to go towards, genders are going to get polarized quickly. Male, female, men, women, man, woman. They're going to get real gendered real fast, because when you ain't got any water that's fresh and you don't know where you're going to get your shelter, and you got people who are taking food, you're going to want to have the protection of a man, and then that family is going to want to have, that man's going to want to have loyalty from you, right? And then you're going to have this foundation, and if there's kids, then they're going to need stability of both male and female talents working together, and then you're going to sync up with other people of like mind, and that's called a city, eventually, or a town, right? So you get right back to feminism is a myth. It's a kind of it's an indulgence, a childish indulgence brought to you by men. Men are the ones that allow feminism to flourish. Like, feminism can't survive in a vacuum absent of protections guaranteed and secured by men, right? The reason why the nanny state is in such antagonism with family is because so many of the things that made family so important get outsourced to the state. Like, if there's a problem, you call the police. Well, it's men showing up usually to, take out the big, scary bad guy trying to get you at your home or whatever, right? They're going to have brutal, stronger force. They can have one small girl, help with the thing and put her knee there too. But that one small girl policeman isn't going to be to take on. Usually, I mean, she might have a gun, he might have a gun. You know what I mean? So all things being equal, it's going to be men having to enforce your security if you think you don't need no man, right? It's going to, if you need a plumber because your toilet's broken down, it's probably going to be a man. If you need someone to go into the sewage system and figure out a structural problem with the septic tank or the sewage system, that's going to be a man. You know, if you need the road paved because there's a giant sinkhole that opened up, you know, you're not going to call a third wave feminist and say, hey, can you deconstruct this pothole? You're going to call a man, and men are going to fill that pothole or fix it and solve the problem, build the road again. If there's a flood and you are trapped holding on to a tree, you're not going to call up your gender studies professor and say, hey, can you deconstruct this flood away? Can you use your, you know, critique of cisgenderism to make this flood stop? No, you're going to call a man who's going to help you and risk his life, because that's his job, to risk his life for the help of a stranger, most likely, from the raging river rapids from the river flood, right? So if your car breaks down and there's a famine and people are in a state of violence and melee, you're going to need a man that you can trust to help you fix that car, most likely. Because there's statistically always one example of a woman who can fix a car, but mostly it's going to be more men that are going to be interested in that type of skill set. And that's not violent to say so, but it is violent from a childish man-child mindset. You see what I mean? When you have a man-child mindset, for me to say that men are typically going to be better at fixing cars than a woman, that is an act of the boundary. That's an act of differentiation that to a childish mind, a man-child is going to say, it's not fair. It didn't feel right. It's called mimetic resentment, okay? That's mimetic resentment. Why can't we all be equal? Everybody gets one lollipop. Everybody fix a car. Everybody equal strong. Everybody get cookie, right? Everybody fix a home. Everybody fix the river from flooding in the house. No, that's not how life works. That's how a man-child works, or a woman-child, whatever you want to call it. Right? That's how adult child syndrome is. I think that's the term they use now, adult child syndrome.
You're saying we need to be followers
that's the reigning ideology of our time is adult child syndrome. That's the reigning ideology that rules over all these other ideologies, you know?
You're saying we need to be followers of Andrew Tate? Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for your time. I appreciate it. Yeah, I mean, was there any other stories we had to land the plane here?
No, I guess like this is enough for right now, and I think we covered a lot of things other than your daily headlines, and I think that's one of the great things about a neighbor's choice, is that we always go to the big picture and try to delve deeper rather than get stuck at knee-jerk reaction and mimetic rivalry with mass media. So I certainly enjoyed talking to you, David, about this, and I hope we can do it again.
Thank you. Watch out for that high tide behind you. It's going to come in real swift if you don't watch out.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Take care.
Take care. Have a great day. God bless.